Crime is sexy.
El Chapo's Supermax prison is worse than you think. Joaquin Guzman, also known as El Chapo, is one of the most notorious and feared cartel kingpins in the world. He once ruled the Sinaloa Cartel and at his peak was bringing in $3 billion each year, controlling half of the entire Mexican narcotics trade. El Chapo was a ruthless criminal who climbed the cartel pyramid by killing, maiming, and bribing. He owned a couple of yachts, a fleet of Learjets, a diamond-encrusted pistol, and a private zoo with tigers, crocodiles, and panthers. His infamous reputation meant there was a $5 million reward on his head. El Chapo has been arrested and sent to prison twice before, but he managed to escape. However, after his third arrest in 2016, he was sent to a maximum security prison in the US, known for being nearly impossible to escape. Today, he lives in this prison cell in isolation, spending 23 hours a day inside a soundproof cell. El Chapo and his fellow inmates are thoroughly supervised and even cuffed and shackled during their 1 hour of spare time. ADX Florence, the prison where El Chapo is held, is the highest security prison in the US. It was built as a result of several incidents in other US prisons during the 1980s where security guards were killed. ADX Florence was created to make a building impossible to escape, where there are more guards than prisoners and a tight schedule that doesn't allow prisoners to cause damage. It's surrounded by gun towers, several rows of razor wire fences, and dozens of guards at every corner. El Chapo is no exception to these strict conditions. He's held in a special unit for the most dangerous and high-profile inmates, known as the H Unit. This unit is even more secure than the rest of the prison, with additional measures in place to prevent any attempt at escape or communication with the outside world. El Chapo's cell in the H Unit is just 7 feet by 12 feet, barely enough space to move around. The cell is completely bare, with only a concrete bed, a toilet, and a sink. There are no windows, no television, and no access to the internet. The only reading material he's allowed is a Bible and other religious texts. El Chapo is allowed 1 hour of exercise a day, but even this is strictly controlled. He's taken to a small outdoor cage where he can see the sky, but not much else. He's always escorted by at least 2 guards who are armed and ready to use force if necessary. Despite these harsh conditions, El Chapo seems to have adapted to life at ADX Florence. He's reportedly in good health and has not attempted to escape or cause any trouble. He spends most of his time reading and writing letters to his family and lawyers. El Chapo's lawyers have complained about the conditions of his confinement, arguing that they are inhumane and violate his human rights. They have also expressed concern about his mental health, given the prolonged isolation and the lack of social interaction. However, their efforts to improve his conditions have so far been unsuccessful. Life at ADX Florence prison is extremely harsh, even for the most dangerous and high-profile inmates like El Chapo. The prison is designed to be as secure and restrictive as possible, with limited contact with the outside world and almost complete isolation. El Chapo's life at ADX Florence is a far cry from the luxurious lifestyle he once enjoyed as a drug lord, but it seems that he's accepted his fate and is making the best of his situation. His imprisonment at ADX Florence serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of a life of crime and the lengths that authorities will go to ensure that justice is served. ADX Florence is a high-security federal prison located in Florence, Colorado. It's one of the most secure prisons in the United States and is home to some of the most dangerous and violent criminals in the country. Life at ADX Florence is a far cry from the world outside, with strict regulations, minimal social contact, and an emphasis on control and discipline. This essay will provide an insight into life at ADX Florence prison and what it's like to be an inmate in one of the most secure prisons in the world. The first thing that strikes you when you enter ADX Florence is the sheer magnitude of the security measures in place. The prison is surrounded by razor wire fences, guard towers, and watchful guards. To get into the prison, visitors have to go through rigorous security checks, including metal detectors and pat-downs. Inmates are monitored round the clock by security cameras, and movement is strictly regulated. Inmates are not allowed to move around the prison freely and are escorted to all activities and appointments. Inmates at ADX Florence spend most of their day in the cells, which are small, windowless, and sparsely furnished. The cells are designed to minimize any contact between inmates and to prevent prevent them from causing harm to themselves or others. The cells are soundproof, so inmates cannot hear any noise from outside. The only contact they have with the outside world is through their food tray slot and a small television in their cell. Inmates can watch TV for a few hours a day, but the channels they have access to are limited, and the content is carefully selected to avoid anything that could incite violence or unrest. Inmates at ADX Florence are not allowed to work, and they do not receive any privileges or rewards. They're not allowed to have any personal belongings except for a few books, magazines, and photos. They do not have access to the internet, email, or social media, and communication with the outside world is strictly regulated. Inmates can receive letters from their family and friends, but these are screened before they're delivered. Phone calls are also limited and monitored. The social isolation at ADX Florence is one of the most challenging aspects of life at the prison. Inmates are not allowed to have contact with other prisoners except for a few minutes a day during recreation time. Even then, they're kept in separate cages and cannot talk to each other. Inmates cannot form groups or gangs and are not allowed to communicate with other inmates, even through gestures or signals. The prison administration is keen to prevent any form of communication that could lead to violence or unrest. Inmates at ADX Florence are subjected to a strict routine, which is designed to keep them occupied and prevent them from getting bored or frustrated. The routine includes daily meals, exercise, and educational programs. Inmates are given access to a library of books and educational materials, and they can study for degrees and qualifications. However, the options are limited, and the material is carefully selected to avoid anything that could be seen as provocative or harmful. Life at ADX Florence is not just physically challenging, but also mentally and emotionally draining. Inmates are subjected to constant surveillance and control, and any form of disobedience is met with swift and severe punishment. Inmates can be placed in solitary confinement for days or even months, and they can be denied access to basic amenities such as showers, food, and medical care. The prison administration is keen to maintain control over the inmates and to prevent any form of resistance or rebellion. The conditions at ADX Florence have been criticized by human rights organizations who argue that the prison is inhumane and violates basic human rights. Inmates at ADX Florence are deprived of their freedom and subjected to extreme levels of control and surveillance. Life at ADX Florence is seriously debated, with many calling it torture and a violation of human rights. Inmates spend 23 hours a day in solitary confinement with only a 4-inch window to look out of. The lack of human contact and interaction has caused many inmates to suffer from severe mental illnesses. There have been cases of inmates screaming for hours, hurting themselves, and even mutilating their own bodies. Some have gone as far as biting off their own fingers, leading to questions about the effects of extreme isolation. El Chapo, once a feared and powerful kingpin, now lives in a tiny cell with limited access to technology and human interaction. The notorious drug lord will spend the rest of his life in isolation, cut off from the world he once controlled. We hope you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe.